IVM.
Welcome to episode 65 of the Edges Sledges Cricket Podcast. This is DJ, your host from London, and I've got with me Ashwin. Guys, it's been a great week of cricket. We've had some pretty exciting matches. India's played 2 games this week, actually, since we last spoke. But first, I want to thank every one of you who sent in a voice note talking about the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast. That's much appreciated. We're going to try and play some of those voice notes along on the podcast going forward. So thank you so much for sending those, and keep sending them in to us. Just email them to us, record it on your phone and email it to us. It's really great hearing what you guys think about the podcast, right? So Ashwin, how are you doing? How's life? What's going on?
I'm well. We're getting into what the commentators cliche is the business end of the tournament. So pretty exciting. I apologize for anybody if my audio quality is not as good as normal. It's a long weekend up here in North America, so I am on a remote island in the middle of one of the Great Lakes. But it's great fun. I'm happy to be able to join you. And if the audio quality is not great, it'll be back by next week.
I can hear some birds twittering in the background. Is that right? Or I don't know, maybe that's something weird going on with the audio. But anyway, Ashwin, let's talk about this week, right? So there have been some pretty interesting games. Australia versus New Zealand was meant to be a big game. It didn't actually turn out to be that big. There were some pretty special moments in that game, though. The capture by Guptill, I thought, was fantastic. South Africa, Sri Lanka kind of put paid to Sri Lanka's hopes. So South Africa, after being knocked out of the World Cup, just kind of woke up and said, we're going to put in a massive performance with Amla scoring some runs. Pakistan, very interestingly, played a great game against New Zealand. Babar Azam scoring a fantastic 100 and then just squeaked past Afghanistan. So pretty exciting being a Pakistan fan. I mean, it would be peak Pakistan, as I said, which would play a great match against New Zealand and raise everyone's hope and then get knocked out of the World Cup by Afghanistan. So that was all exciting. But India, as we said, played 2 games, right? So Ashwin, let's talk about the first game, India-West Indies. As expected, India came out on top, but was it as dominant a performance as you thought we could have put in?
I think it kind of was. And I think what's interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk about England next, but what's interesting is I think you and I grew up in the generation when India was a batting dominant side, probably not the best in the world, but one of the best in the world, obviously, with Sachin, etc. But the bowling was the weak point. So tuning in to watch India batting and just not logging in even to watch the India bowling. And I feel like it's so interesting that now it's almost the opposite for me. And I would never want to miss a spell of Bumrah, Shami, or Bumrah and Bhuvi bowling with Chahal coming on next. But I'm kind of okay if I had to miss one of the 2 innings, the ones I would skip is batting. So anyway, to the West Indies innings, we did not bat that well. We made 240 something, not a great performance. But the bowlers are who you back to be able to defend yourself, right? That to be able to show up even when the batsmen don't do well. And they did that, and it was just such a clinical bowling performance that I just loved watching our bowlers putting on a show against West Indies.
Yeah, I just want to... So we scored 268 actually for 7, which didn't look like it was happening for a little while. But let's talk a little bit about 2 points there. Kohli got another start, didn't go ahead and get 100. And Dhoni was about to be stumped for the 2nd time in a row. So, and I'm sure this will come up again in the context of England-India, but what are your thoughts on those 2 points?
So, I mean, I'm always in the give the benefit of the doubt to Kohli camp. This is, against West Indies, was his 4th half-century in a row. And while he typically has one of the best conversion rates from 50 to 100 in the history of the game, he hasn't yet made a World Cup 100. I think what's interesting, though, is he's still playing his position. Like he's playing the role the side needs him to at that number 3 slot, depending on how the openers do. So I'm still really, really thrilled with Kohli's performances. Anybody who disses him should remember he's got over 11,000 runs at an average of over 60, which has never been done before. So in the ODI game. So I think let's continue to give credit where it's due. I'm okay with him making great 50s. I'm sure he will convert 1 to a century this tournament.
Very interesting, and I'm sure we're going to talk more about Kohli's non-conversion of hundreds. But let's come to India-England, right? Big game, massive kind of build-up even before the World Cup. Everyone was like, these are the 2 big teams. Everyone's been looking forward to the 30th of June for for months, actually, England, India, and there was a lot of interest generated in the game itself because I think if India had beaten England, their World Cup campaign would have probably gone completely off the rails. It would have been their fourth loss, and they would have really struggled to make the semi-finals. As it turned out, England did beat India by 31 runs at Edgbaston, which brought back some pretty horrific memories for those of us who remember the first test from last year. Anish Patel, one of our listeners, actually messaged in and said, this is bringing back those memories, and a lot of us actually thought the same. But Ashwin, let's start with the selection, right, from the top. Varun, unfortunately, isn't on this segment of the show, but at 10 a.m. this morning, the news was broken that Vijay Shankar had an injured toe or a toe niggle, I think, which had been caused, I think, by Bumrah hitting him before the Afghanistan game. And that brought in Rishabh Pant into the 11. Varun had predicted it way back in January, in fact, saying that he will not only make the squad, he will make the 11. And incredible. Even when Pant wasn't in the squad, he stuck with his player. So kudos to Varun. But what did you think of the selection, Ashwin? And should maybe DK have been given a shot?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I think you and I both need to give credit where it's due to Varun. I think he called Pant being in the 11, and we both laughed at him, not once, not twice, but multiple times for making a prediction that there will be a player playing in India's 11 that's not even in the squad.
Just like I'm going to get laughed at when Australia win this World Cup, right?
Pretty much,
they've
right?
got zero chance of winning it.
Yeah, you were so steadfast in your prediction. But no, so let's get to the selection. I think I like Vijay Shankar. I think he can potentially play a unique role. But I think he is sort of that quote-unquote safe bet that the Indian team could have taken because he's not a maverick kind of player. He's not going to pick up 5 wickets. He's never going to make a century. Basically, Vijay Shankar is that guy who'll give you 20 to 30 runs and maybe 1 wicket. Rishabh Pant is that guy who may not give you 20 to 30 runs every game, but when he performs, he'll give you 50, 60 plus. And when he doesn't, he'll get out cheaply. And that's what the Indian team has gotten used to with Sehwag and those kind of players that are a little bit radical, but they're a little bit of a gamble. So all that to just say, I think Rishabh Pant was a gamble that the Indian selectors were willing to take. I think Varun's been saying it for a long time. I've been sort of on both sides of this debate at some point in the last year. But I'm happy he got his chance, even though, as you're going to say, I'm sure next, it didn't quite pay out. But it was a good match between India and England, and I'm happy Pant got his shot.
Yeah, and I think what we're missing is that Shikhar Dhawan solidity at the top. And it's a really big shame that Gabbar continues to sit out this World Cup. I think the top 3 have been such a massive feature for Indian cricket. This is really testing their bench strength at the exactly wrong time. But anyway, let's move on to the match itself, right? England won the toss, decided to have a bat, which some people thought was maybe a bit of a regressive move, given that they hadn't been chasing well. They saw it as an admission that they needed to bat first to win the match. We started off pretty well. I mean, Shami bowled a really nice opening spell. He was really quite unlucky not to pick up a wicket. Bumrah bowled very well as well. But I think what today just showed was that if India don't pick up early wickets, the spinners aren't quite as effective as we think they are. And I think it's good that this has come up at this stage in the tournament instead of the semi-finals. I think India need to do a little bit of thinking about their combination and what they can go to if the quicks haven't picked up early wickets and the spinners are going around the park, because that's exactly what happened. The quicks didn't pick up early wickets and England put on 161 runs for the opening partnership of just 22 overs, which is just an incredible opening partnership. Roy and Bairstow were just smashing it everywhere. Chahal and Kuldeep didn't know where to look. I think Chahal went for his worst ever one-day figures. He's got none for 88. Kuldeep finally picked up a wicket. Jaddu coming in, taking a screamer of a catch to dismiss Roy. But Ashwin, your thoughts on the Dhoni non-DRS review? And just to put this in context for all our listeners who I'm sure have watched the DRS, Jason Roy, I think he hadn't got too many by that stage, just gloved one of Hardik Pandya to Dhoni, and we refused to review it because it was probably too early on in the innings. And I think that really cost us because the next one went for 6, then another one went for 4. Your thoughts on that, Ashwin?
Yeah, so many thoughts. One, England with Jason Roy is clearly vastly superior to England with James Ince. There's no doubt about that. Second, I don't think we can ever fault Dhoni for quote unquote messing up a DRS call, because over the years he has saved India's behind so many times because of his unbelievable ability. I mean, we call it the Dhoni review system for a reason, right? So I don't think you fault Dhoni for one poor choice on a review. I think it could have gone either way. I continue to struggle. I mean, we didn't talk about it much, but in Afghanistan, Pakistan too, if Afghanistan had more reviews, the game would have maybe had a different result. So I continue to struggle with the fact that you just get one incorrect review. There's no good answer. You give teams 2 or 3 reviews and everybody will review everything. But in the absence of that situation, we are having games with different results because of poor umpiring. So we shouldn't be calling it a missed review by Dhoni. We should be calling it terrible, terrible umpiring on the field.
Yeah, but I'm not so sure about that, because I actually can't see, if the umpire wasn't sure about it and the players weren't sure about it, I mean, it was not such a terrible decision, right? I mean, if it was a howler, they should have gone up, to be completely honest. So.
Fair. I guess that's fair. I can see it going either way. My point is, I don't think you could blame Dhoni for the call he made, because then we need to be balanced in when you give blame versus when you give credit. And you should give enough credit to Dhoni for all the amazing calls he's made over the years.
Fair enough. So we're going to continue our search for, if you remember the Match Ka Mujrim segment that used to come at one point in one of the World Cups. So we're going to continue our search for that. So our bowling, actually, we pulled it back, I think, quite well, because at one stage it looked like England were going to get about 400 runs. Kuldeep took that wicket off Jason Roy. Bairstow just strangely lost form after he got to his 100. He got out for 111, punt taking a catch off Shami, and then Shami picked up 5 wickets, and we almost restricted the English team to 338 all out. For 7, I think. And then Ashwin, let's talk through the batting effort. What did you make of our chase? Because we ended at 306 for 5. Losing by 31 runs. What was that batting effort, and what did you make of it? We scored 28, remember, in the power play. So let's start from there.
I mean, obviously not great that Rahul got out for a duck of 9 balls, right? Definitely not a great place to be. But I think what was interesting, and I was watching this game with some folks who are not cricket fans, and they were saying, hey, they seem to be behind the rate. What's going on? And I said, you know what? You have the number 1 and probably one of the top 5 ODI batsmen in the world batting together. If anybody can chase this, it's going to be these two. And I think Kohli and Rohit know how to pace their innings. They started slow while it was tough to bat. But, by the middle overs, to be in a point where both batsmen are batting at about 85 strike rate is a pretty good place to be. So I thought Rahul did poorly. I think they started slow in the power play, but that's pretty much been India's strategy for the last 2 to 3 years.
Did we miss a trick, you think, by not promoting Pant up the order, especially given Rahul's injury and all of that stuff? Do you think we missed that?
That's a big question. And I think you and I have talked about this kind of off the podcast, but I know you would love to see Pant opening. Pant is an opening batsman. I think what we've talked about in the show before is Shaw, Gill, Pant. India continues to rear amazing opening batsmen, and we continue to have a gap in our middle order. And so I think they will do whatever they can to get Pant to play that number 4 slot. But I think they're. I mean, I think you and I are thinking about him opening, but I don't think the selection or the leadership is.
Because I actually see Pant as a Gilchrist equivalent, a guy who just comes in and I mean, if you Pant bats for 10 overs in the power play, the game could be done by then. Honestly, I mean,
if they choose to play him like a Sehwag, then yes, you're absolutely right. But I'm not sure this leadership sees him that way, and maybe that's because our wicketkeeper has played such a critical lower order role that they're going to expect somebody who eventually fills in Dhoni's role to play a lower order role.
Right, so moving on, Rohit got a fantastic 100. Kohli again fell for a 66. Pandya got 45. Dhoni got 40 odd. Kedar got a run ball 12. What happened with our chase? Where did we go wrong?
I mentioned to you this to you offline. I think India's exact model for a chase has become either Rohit gets 150, Kohli gets 100, or some combination of the two. And unfortunately today, Rohit got a century but couldn't keep going. And we're used to these daddy hundreds or huge centuries from Rohit. And we're also used to Kohli at least converting his 50 to 100. And neither of those happened today. And I'm sorry to say it, but we just don't have the 4, 5, 6, 7 to compete with a side like England. that means that's our 4, 5, 6, 7 today is Pant, Pandya, Dhoni, and Jadhav in that order, and it's just not at the level that could chase down 338. We would have done it if the top three fired.
So we know that Dhoni's been taking quite a lot of the flack on the lack of intent towards the end of the innings on social media, both from Pakistani fans, surprisingly, and Pakistani ex-cricketers, as well as Indian fans who are not happy with his lack of hitting out towards the end of the innings. I mean, after that slow start and after Pandya went realistically, I think Dhoni basically went into damage limitation mode, to be honest. He was struggling, I'm not going to deny that, but so did Kedar struggle. So we didn't really look like we were in the hunt towards the end. And it was a bit of a strange finish, but I mean, it was a strange start. So I think the first 10 overs and maybe the last 5 overs combined did cost us. So what is the remedy for this? Is Kedar's spot now, after Shankar's spot being under scrutiny in the previous game, is Kedar's spot now coming more and more into scrutiny? Is it going to be DK? Let's talk about bringing Jaddu in because he gives that 6th bowling option, and it's not like Kedar's batting is any better apparently than
it
Jadeja's.
Might be. I think Kedar's spot might be under scrutiny. I'm not sure it fully deserved to be, but I think the challenge is I have backed Kedar myself on the premise that he gives you that extra bowling option. But Pandya's been doing a pretty stellar job with the ball, and he's been pretty consistently given 10 overs. And so if you don't need Jadhav in the team as a bowling option, I'm not sure he's your best pure batsman in the country.
So who should we replace him with? Because even today he didn't bowl, right? So, I mean, if ever there was a case for bowling Jadhav, it was when Roy and Bairstow were going completely nuts and hitting it over the short boundary.
So I have a hunch that the case for bowling Jadhav in the current leadership size is not based on us getting hit or not doing well. It's purely if somebody gets injured. And they've seen Bhuvi get injured before, and Shankar had to fill his spell. So the reason for that one backup bowling option is largely for the case of injury. I think it's interesting that Williamson, Root, and Smith have all bowled, and those are arguably the other 3 best batsmen in the world. So maybe somebody like a Kohli will find the energy to bowl a little and alleviate that 6th bowling challenge.
So you haven't answered. Is it going to be DK or is it going to be Jadeja? I know you're a big Jadeja fan.
I think they're going to stick with this. I think they're going to stick with Jadhav because he's played most of the one days for the last year. He did make a 50 in this tournament, so I have a feeling they're going to stick.
Very interesting. So Ashwin's actually going with the theory that they're going to stick with Jadhav going forward. Very interesting because a lot of
I just don't think there's long enough left, right? You have 2 group games and then there's knockouts, so they're going to stick with what they kind of know worked. And let's not forget, out of 7 games, India's won 5 and 1 was rained out. So it's still a pretty damn good record.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it almost went to template, right? Like England got a big score. They didn't really finish very well. And then India chased nicely to get to 300. It was, I mean, if India actually pulled that chase off, I think it would have been incredible and it would have been quite an unbelievable chase in some ways. It's the highest score that India would have chased in a World Cup.
But I think that anybody would have chased to the World Cup.
Is that right? Okay,
yeah,
wow.
That's what I heard.
Wow. So, it would have been a big chase, but we unfortunately fell short. So we've got 2 good games coming up next week. And what do you make of Bangladesh and Sri Lanka? I mean, we've got 2 games left in the group stage. India should be through to the semi-finals. I think we're fairly comfortably placed at the moment. But what are your thoughts on those 2 games? Are we going to experiment a little bit with the combination or just stick with what we've got?
I think Sri Lanka is the interesting one where India will look to go for the win, largely because Sri Lanka's already knocked out. And mathematically, there's still a way India doesn't make it. But I think they feel pretty good that they will. So I think Sri Lanka, they're going to go big. I think Bangladesh is going to be the more challenging match, which is an interesting statement because Bangladesh hasn't quite been there for the last few years as a side. But I think they're going to be pushing really hard. Their last 2 games are versus India and versus Pakistan, and if they win both, they have a fairly good shot. So I think it's going to be a challenging match. Shakib is in the form of his life, and we'll see how that match goes.
And we've got some really great interviews lined up after this break, guys. So stick around for that. We've got a Bangladesh supporter and podcaster coming up, Roushan Alam. And we've got one of my favorite cricket info writers, Andrew Fidel Fernando, coming up for the Sri Lanka preview. So stick around with us after this break. We promise it's going to be worth it.
Yo, how's it going? I'm Jay Cricket Dude. Please follow me on Twitter. And you're listening to the Edges Sledges Podcast, which I've been listening to for the last 12 months, I'd say. And you may not know this, but for some reason, we are standing in a disabled toilet because it's really loud outside. But yeah, anyway, you're listening to the Edges and Sledges podcast. And I recommend this because it's an awesome podcast.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please make sure you do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. On our social media, one of the things we do is if you send us a screenshot of what you're listening to, we will repost it on our social network so that people can see that what people are listening to. Put us some comments and we'll respond to them. Also want to let people know that we're still hiring. We're looking for producers, content creators, audio engineers, developers, designers, and business roles, and basically all kinds of other things. Go to the careers page on ivmpodcast.com or send us an email at careers@indusvox.com. Wanted to announce 2 new shows that we are starting, Tech Careers in the New and Agla Station Adulthood. Tech Careers in the New is a brand new podcast presented by Accenture. It's hosted by our very own Shiladitya Mukhopadhyay, my co-host on Shunya One. On this show, he's talking to Accenture leaders about the latest and greatest in the world of technology and gives exclusive tips on technology careers, how to grab opportunities and stay relevant. Watch out for fortnightly episodes on Wednesdays starting July 3rd. The other new show that we're launching this week is an exciting show called Agla Station Adulthood, where best friends Ritasha Rathore and Ayushi Amin ride through the various stations of life. Whether you're in your mid-20s, just entering them, or about to cross into the next decade, tune into this fun show. On the Seen and the Unseen, author and researcher Manu Pillai returns, this time to have an in-depth conversation about his new book, The Courtesan, the Mahatma, and the Italian Brahmin. They discuss an extremely wide range of topics from Italian sages to Gandhian principles to what India would have looked like without the British invasion. On Keeping It Queer, Naveen and Farhad are joined by our producer at IVM and stand-up comedian Abbas Momin to discuss straight pride. Continuing our producer special on paperback, we have our producer Madhuri Advani talking about storytelling and her intervention into various spaces through stories. On the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast, DJ and Varun discuss the match between India and Afghanistan and delve into a deeper conversation with Michelle St. Patrick Hewitt from West Indies and James Butler, host of the Cricket Badger radio show podcast. On States of Anarchy, writer and columnist Devika Kher joins Hamsini to talk about the lack of jobs the world over, the gender disparity at workplaces, and the possible solutions to them. On the Pragati podcast, environmental researcher Lingaraj Jayaprakash joins Pawan to talk about climate change, air pollution, and the looming water crisis. On The Origin of Things, Chuck narrates a story of hills, college memories, and deadly encounters. Will you be able to guess the brand before Chuck reveals it? And with that, let's continue with your show.
So today we have a very special guest with us, Roushan Alam, who runs the Bangla Cricket Podcast. Welcome, Roushan, to the One Tip, One Hand Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast. Great to have you on.
Hello, thanks so much for having me.
Roushan, do you want to do a little bit of an introduction for our listeners?
Yeah, so I'm Roushan. I run a podcast based in the UK. It's called the Bangla Cricket Podcast, which follows basically everything to do with Bangladeshi cricket on and off the field. And I also do some work for the BBC Asia Network and 5 Live. I've been covering the Bangladesh games for the BBC during the World Cup.
Fantastic, Roushan. Thanks for being on the podcast. And we were in England as well, the 3 of us. So this podcast is run by DJ, Ashwin, and myself, and we were following the India team as well. So it seems like a fun thing to do and something that all cricket fans do for their nations.
Yeah, absolutely. It's become the new way of expressing your views, isn't it? It's the podcast is the new conversation in the coffee shop, isn't it?
Absolutely. So it's been great fun and a good journey for us too. So, Roushan, let's get into it. We've got an India-Bangladesh game coming up on Tuesday. And we thought for our listeners, we just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Bangladesh team, their journey through the World Cup. So I'm going to ask you straight up, what's been your favorite memory of a World Cup and your worst memory so far? And overall, just talk us through the Bangladesh World Cup journey.
Well, do you know what? I say the earliest World Cup memory I have is 1999 when Bangladesh played in their first Cricket World Cup. And I must have been maybe 12 or 13. I didn't realise Bangladesh had a cricket team at that point, and football was the main sport in Bangladesh. But they came to the UK, and I think that was the first sort of real moment of excitement. And obviously, we beat Pakistan in Northampton, which sort of kick-started this really long kind of test journey that's happened since then. My worst memory is probably the 2003 World Cup. We'd been a test nation for 3 years. A lot of excitement. We had a big first World Cup since the 99 heroics. and it was a horror show. I remember being in tears as we were bundled out for 120 runs against Canada, and then I remember Chaminda Vast took 3 wickets with his first 3 balls to reduce us for 0 runs for 3 wickets. So I remember that being probably the worst World Cup memory, because we'd built it up so much in our heads going, right, we're a test nation now, we're a proper team at this Cricket World Cup. So that had to be the worst. And then I think since then it's sort of been better. 2007 was a good one because we had this kind of new generation of players coming through, the Shakibs, the Mushfiqs, the Tameems, all playing in their first World Cup. And obviously that wonderful win against India that everyone still talks about, and that win against South Africa. So 2007 for me is up there. 2011, I think, never really took off. There was a lot of pressure on Bangladesh as one of the host nations. We beat England, which was wonderful, but nothing else really went in our favour. So then I think 2015 for me probably is my other favourite World Cup, if I'm honest. I think that the win against England, getting to the quarterfinals, and doing it in slightly harsher conditions of Australia and New Zealand was a big thing for Bangladesh. I think 2015 felt like my favourite World Cup.
Absolutely, and it's so funny. Your worst, all our worst memories are in horrible losses. I think my worst memory of India at World Cups is probably 2007 when we got knocked out. So yeah, it's amazing what kind of this game does for our passion and memories. But you talked a lot about Bangladesh coming up in the last few years. 2015, I remember clearly. I mean, it was a good quarterfinal. There was, of course, that epic no ball with Rohit Sharma, which is still debatable, and I still think a lot of Bangladesh fans are upset about that. But tell me, but tell me, do you know from a local Bangladesh perspective, in the last 10 years, has a lot changed in terms of infrastructure, focus on cricket? Because, before talking to you, I was reading up a little bit as well, and it almost till the late 90s, football was the most popular sport in Bangladesh. So over the last 2 decades, what has happened locally?
Well, it's really just begun in the last 2 decades. I mean, when Bangladesh got test status, there wasn't a proper first-class structure. I mean, the most kind of prominent cricket tournament in Bangladesh at the time would have been probably university cricket, 3-day cricket, which is ironic because that's at the time how long most of our test matches would used to last, probably about 3 days. So yeah, they really built it up from the ground. I think they still had to rush the paperwork through and find the infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I don't just mean in tournaments. I mean, obviously there was a first-class tournament, but a lot of it was kind of quite capital-centric, quite Dhaka-centric. So what's really improved in the last sort of, say, 10 years or so is the fact that cricket has become more regional. So there are tournaments in Chittagong, in Sylhet, in Khulna, and now you can be a young cricketer at an academy in Chittagong with an equal chance of getting into the national side as someone if you're playing in the capital city. So that's improved. Also, just our kind of our management system has worked a lot better. I think, when we watch people like Mohammad Ashwin back in 2005, I don't think Bangladesh knew how to talent manage a superstar cricketer. I think they were just these guys who were scoring cricket but didn't really have the support or didn't have the finances or didn't have the kind of management of how to nurture someone who's a quality cricketer into becoming a world-class name. And so I think that's all sort of become put in place. And then just generally, I think there's a lot more investment, there's a lot more interest. And so, yeah, I think it's looking a lot more like a kind of an Indian infrastructure, obviously nowhere near the same level of funding and money. But I mean, even say with the BPL, the Bangladesh Premier League, which is an incredible opportunity for youngsters to play with big international stars. I used to hear stories of the first 2 where people would sign players after watching them on YouTube, whereas now we have scouts, we have people going to games in regional cities. So I think it's been a big improvement. I think there's still work to do. But compared to 20 years ago, when there wasn't even a first-class tournament and this side was just flung into the tested arena, it's improved a lot, and they've had to learn quickly.
Absolutely. And actually, it's a great story for all cricket fans. I mean, in 20 years, you've got Bangladesh who's come up so well. It's inspiring. And personally, I do hope countries like Afghanistan and all get there even quicker, because that's just, that'll just do wonders for the game. And, having mentioned the journey so far, I think, honestly, Bangladesh has had a fantastic 2019 World Cup. They've beaten South Africa, they've beaten West Indies, both teams they lost to in the previous World Cup. I mean, even against Australia scored 381, but Bangladesh hit 333. Against the West Indies, they chased down 322 in just 41.3 overs. How's it been watching this World Cup for you?
It's felt well. It's been brilliant, first of all, because the boys have done really, really well. But it feels a little bit different because, say, in 2011 or 2015, those wins would have been upsets. Whereas this time around, there's a genuine belief that this is the greatest Bangladesh team that they've ever sent to a World Cup. We've got more experience than some of the other sides there. We've got this core backbone of these 5 players who are at their peak. You know, the Mushraf, Tamim, Mahmudullah, Mushfiq and Shakib. They're not inexperienced people. They're players who played together for a long time. They've built character. And also that, like, the things that have undone Bangladesh in the past, they've had 2 years, 3 years to do their homework on. We knew Bangladesh struggled against the short ball when we went to South Africa, I think, in 2017. So they went away and worked with it. They toured New Zealand earlier this year and they were like, my God, we can't handle swing and pace. So they worked on it. So there's a real confidence, a quiet confidence with this Bangladesh side that they have played together for a long time. They've developed a lot of character and depth. They've always had talent. I think they've always had talent. They've developed character, depth, experience. And they've come to this World Cup really well prepared. So there's not as much expectation as in hype like you would have had maybe in 2011 when Bangladesh were a host nation. But there's a lot of quiet confidence. And I think as the tournament has progressed, that confidence has sort of grown and grown and grown. And yeah, it's a very kind of assured confidence. I think there are players in that dressing room who genuinely believe they can win every game, and that's the right attitude to have.
Absolutely. And I think there's 2 things that I wanted to also point out in what you said. The first is it's no longer an upset, right? I think that's the key thing. Bangladesh is playing some genuinely good cricket, and I think they beat South Africa, West Indies very convincingly. I think they were on the wrong side against Sri Lanka with that washout. Otherwise, you never know, that one extra point may have really helped.
Yeah. I agree. And I think, like, for a Bangladeshi, for me, I've said from the start, this tournament has, you know, obviously you want to get to the semi-finals, you want to try and win the tournament. But for me, this tournament has always been about rewriting Bangladesh's cricketing reputation, because I follow Bangladesh day in, day out. Most people don't. You know, with Shakib Al Hasan, a lot of people are like, oh my God, who's this world-class player scoring 2 centuries back-to-back? But most of Asia probably have known about him for the last 10, 12 years. So I'm very aware that a Cricket World Cup puts a highlight on it and there's a lot more interest from international media. And so for Bangladesh, it's an opportunity for the team to rewrite their cricketing reputation, because let's be honest, you know, they're a team that people don't want to host and don't want to tour because they go, well, we're not going to sell TV rights, we're not going to fill stadiums, they're not going to be competitive enough. And so if the one takeaway is that Bangladesh can fill stadiums and can sell advertising and are worthy of touring. You know, Australia cancelled a tour just less than a year ago because it wasn't going to be commercially viable. So I think for Bangladesh fans and the Bangladesh team, that's probably the bigger win than you know, a final position in this World Cup.
Absolutely. And filling stadiums, I mean, there's no doubt. I think 2 years ago in an England-Bangladesh game in the Champions Trophy, I remember Ben Stokes actually came out and said he was really upset because there were no English fans in the stadium. It was all filled by Bangladeshi fans. So there's no doubt they can fill up their stadiums. The second thing was really, you know, I read an article just earlier saying a lot of these guys have been injured over the last 2 years, including a Mortaza who's refused to go for a hamstring scan, Tamim who hurt himself, and a number of other guys. So to me, it just shows the commitment, right? We are here, we are at the World Cup, we want to be known on a world stage, and there's just such a great determination. And with that, I wanted to ask you, talk us through some of the key players. I mean, I have to admit, I was going to ask you at the start, is Shakib the next Kallis? But I don't even want to say that because I think there is nobody like Shakib.
yeah, I agree. It's a fascinating one where I've been having a lot of conversations with people like, who's this Shakib guy? And I'm like, he has been around for the best part of a decade. He's been on that all-rounder rankings, maybe except with the exception of a few months where Rashid Khan took over. He's more or less been in that number 1 or 2 spot for the last decade. So yeah, I mean, Shakib is undoubtedly, I think, the greatest cricketer Bangladesh have ever produced. And I genuinely actually confidently believe he should be able to walk into most 2020 franchise sides, let alone most other international sides. He's such an experienced cricketer and such a determined cricketer. I think he only got 1 game at the IPL this year, but he described it as the best, kind of the most focused time he had because he was able to work on his fitness, he was able to train, he was able to eat healthily. And so he's come into this tournament in the form of his life. And for a long time, he's carried Bangladesh with the bat and ball. And, you know, even in this World Cup, we've seen him move up to the number 3 position, which is carrying even more responsibility. I think very few players face or are involved with more balls in a one-day match than Shakib Al Hasan in terms of balls bowled and balls faced. So yeah, he's a world-class player, and he has been for a long time. And I'm glad he's finally getting the international recognition that, if I'm honest, he's deserved. And people have said to me, you know, if Shakib wasn't Bangladeshi, would his value have been higher? Completely. If he was playing in an England side the way he is, he'd be a national hero. And, you know, he has been for Bangladesh for several years. So I'm glad he's getting the kudos. But around him are the other 4 core players: Mashraf Mortaza, Mushfiqur Rahim, Tamim Iqbal, Mahmudullah. And those 5 guys have played over 100 one-day internationals together. And they've always had talent, but I think it's the character and it's the depth that they've gone through, because they've gone through high moments and great achievements, but they've also gone through kind of humiliation, heartbreak and big losses, getting into finals and losing. And those sort of things are really character building. And then around them, you've got this kind of squad with varying levels of experience and ability and determination who complement them. And I think what's nice about Bangladesh is, say in 2007, you might have relied on Mohammad Ashraful innings to win a game, or you might have relied on Habibur Bashar to come in at number 3 and score runs. Now everyone contributes. I think in the West Indies and the South Africa game, great examples of where runs are scored right the way down the scorecard. Wickets were taken by several bowlers. And so the kind of players like Shomo Sharka, who struggled for a long time, we weren't sure if he was going to be the opener in this tournament, but suddenly he's come to form and is playing and is exciting. Mohammad Shaifuddin, who were touted as a long-term replacement for Mashrafi Mortaza, being Bangladesh's highest wicket taker. So what we have now is a squad with experience, with youth, with depth. And so for me, we've got these big 5 experienced players, but it's just an exciting squad of players who have either been there a long time and players who are coming through.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you've got Mehdi Hassan, you've got Saifuddin, all these guys are stepping up. And I think the only comment I wanted to add is it feels like Shakib has just taken on that anchor role, and as a mature player, people are now batting around him. He's still getting hundreds. It's absolutely fantastic to watch.
Oh yeah, he's just so good. I mean, like his maturity, his head, and a lot of times actually, I also think, if I'm honest, and this might be actually quite similar for something you experienced as an Indian fan, is that I think a lot of people could have discounted his achievements because they're like, well, he's just doing it on slow batting tracks and in Bangladesh at home. But so the fact he's gone to England and is doing it on these slightly greener pitches has, I think, really rewritten his worth and his value and his ability. And people are going, actually, he is actually genuinely world class, isn't he?
Absolutely. Oh man, I can't agree with you more. We got all sorts of comments when we went to Australia this year that the Ranji, everyone's average is above 50. You're playing against the Canteen 11. So it really fired us up. So yeah, we're on the same page there, man. Totally feel you. But yeah, coming to the big one on Tuesday, Bangladesh versus India. So I'm going to ask you first, what's going to happen? And B, where has this rivalry suddenly come out in the last few years of Bangladesh versus India? I mean, we've got the team doing a Nagin dance. Before the podcast, I actually shared with you the image of Taskin holding Dhoni's head.
Yeah, which I'd never seen before until this morning.
I don't know whether to believe you or not, but I'm going to believe you. But where does the rivalry come from, and what's going to happen on Tuesday?
I don't know where this rivalry has come from. I wonder if it's a kind of off-field, on-field a thing, because I think there's, first of all, like, India are the big boys of not just Asian cricket but world cricket, and I think Bangladesh have maybe always found that India kind of like more money motivated than cricket motivated, and so the fact that it took so long for India to host a test match against Bangladesh, it was a bit like, come on guys. So I think there's always been that kind of, not hostility, but kind of that awareness or maybe expectation of an older brother in the cricketing world to put an arm around. And then when India have really supported Afghanistan, I feel like Bangladesh might have just looked on a little bit jealously, going, oh guys, come on, look after us as well. So I think there's always been that. And then it's just the number of games that have actually become quite close. And we've had, I think, in the recent history, like obviously the Asia Cup last year was a last ball win. I think the World 2020 still kind of hurts in a lot of Bangladesh's minds when it went down to the final over. So these India-Bangladesh games, like, India are one of the greatest sides in the world, like pre-tournament favourites. Nobody's doubting their quality. But Bangladesh have always run them close. And I think
always.
That kind of
too close sometimes
infuriates. Exactly. And I think that has infuriated Bangladesh, because they're like, hang on, we can do this. And every time they've come close, it's been India's experience, India's confidence, India's kind of genuine assurance of going, no, we're going to win this game today, that has pulled them through. And so I think that rivalry has come from, I think those close wins, really, those actual proper heartbreaks. The Bangladesh team, and I think actually probably fair to say for the Indian team, quite emotional sides. And so these players in this current team have experienced like some of their lowest moments against India. The Asia Cup final last year. I mean, even the Nidahas Trophy in Sri Lanka was a close one. Like, it's hard to know where the rivalries come from, because if I'm being honest, it feels like India have bigger rivalries to focus on than Bangladesh. The rivalry against Pakistan, but I think there's a feeling of like, this is an India team who expect to get 2 points on Tuesday. let's prove them wrong.
Yeah, and I think the whole World Cup will open up if you guys do prove us wrong. I mean, it'll be great. Pakistan and Bangladesh are now fighting for that fourth spot. Both are alive. It's going to be a cracker World Cup. I honestly didn't expect the World Cup to be so open at this stage.
No, it really has taken twists and turns. And I think there was a point where we were looking at the table and we were like, we're going to have like 10, 11 dead rubbers here. So I'm really happy for the World Cup format that, it's sort of now suddenly come alive. And yeah, I think that Bangladesh-India game, I think Bangladesh will feel that if all the India wins over the last few years, the Asia Cup, the Nidahas Trophy, have all led up to a win at the World Cup, then that would have been worth it, I think.
So what's going to happen? I have to ask your predictions. Who's going to score for Bangladesh? Who's going to take the wickets? And what's the final result going to be?
I mean, it really depends on who plays for Bangladesh. I feel like we've got injuries riddling right the way through the squad. I saw pictures of Mahmudullah on crutches outside the team hotel, so it's impossible to know who's going to start. Well, I think Tamim Iqbal's starting to find form. I think because Shakib's been playing so well, teams have started to have to create not just a plan, but a real kind of tactic around how to deal with him. And so what's been nice is seeing the other players around him step up to the plate. And so Tamim's starting to score. He's not had a real big score as of yet, but he's starting to find runs after a slow start. Mushfiq is turning up to the party. I think Shumar Sharka has played very kind of entertaining cameos, and I think it's time for him to knuckle down and get a big result. And then Liton Das obviously got a century in that Asia Cup final, so that will be fresh in his memory. So I genuinely think it's going to take a team effort. India are a very hard team to beat, and Bangladesh they can't just play at the same capacity. Bangladesh need to play at 20-30% more than India to actually win, let's be honest. But I don't think it's going to be a star performer. It's going to require a team performance. I genuinely believe that.
Awesome. So you heard it there. Let's hope it's a cracker of a game. I think the only thing we as fans can probably expect is that there's going to be no premature celebrations from either side, as has happened in the past. So I think that
I can't promise there won't be any snake dance. I imagine those will appear at some point.
I know. I was going to say, let's see if the Nagin dance happens, but it'll be a cracker of a game. I think the World Cup is open. So for all the listeners, do remember to have a watch on that. And Roushan, thank you so much for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And thank you for coming.
Absolute pleasure too. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. Thank you so much. And so for all our listeners out there, India also plays Sri Lanka next weekend. And so after this, we're going to have a Sri Lanka cricket fan talk to us as well.
So joining us this week is one of my favorite cricket writers. He works at Cricinfo, writes about Sri Lanka. He's a Sri Lankan cricket correspondent. I'm going to let him introduce himself, actually.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Andrew Fidel Fernando. I am, as DJ said, I work for Cricinfo. I'm the Sri Lankan correspondent. I've been around. I've been doing this job for about 7 years now, and I just follow Sri Lanka around, especially when they're playing tests, and I write on them. So. That's about it. Also do a bit of travel writing on the side, but that's about it.
And so you're currently in the World Cup, right? You're following Sri Lanka around England at the moment.
Yeah, I'm at the World Cup, but I'm not strictly following Sri Lanka. I did a few other matches as well. So Cricinfo is a big team. We cover all the matches, and so I've actually right now I think I've covered more South Africa games and maybe even India games than Sri Lanka. But the next couple of games coming up are Sri Lanka matches, Sri Lanka West Indies and Sri Lanka India, the final one. So I'll be linking back up. I'm linking back up with my team right now.
And Fidel, Varun here. Great to have you on the show. I just have to plug in. If you're ever looking for people or hiring, you have to hire DJ and me. You've got the job that we've probably wanted since we were kids.
Oh, really? The which part of the job exactly? The following Sri Lanka around, or just the
working with Cricinfo? It's just very jealous, man.
Yeah. It's a crazy story. I got it basically because I cold emailed them. I hadn't even thought of being a cricket writer at any point, or even a journalist. And then they just said, "Hey, your writing's interesting. Have a go at writing something for us." And I just wrote more and more, and they didn't stop me. So here I am. It's kind of a happy accident, a very happy accident that I'm here.
Awesome. Good. Very inspiring for both of us.
Yeah, that's a great story, man. And we kind of called Twittered you as well. So thanks for being on the show. Also, if you could, when you do get us those jobs at Cricinfo, if you could just leave the deadlines and delivery of articles out, that would be great. right?
Yeah. That is the annoying part of the job, having to actually do it. Yeah, having the title, the title, and just being able to travel around watching cricket would be, that would be that's the dream. I think that's what I'm working towards eventually, not to have to write articles.
And that's the bit we'd be interested in as well. Anyway, Fidel, let's talk a little bit about Sri Lanka, right? So first, how did you become a fan of Sri Lanka? Was it the 1996 World Cup? Obviously, you are Sri Lankan, but what piqued your interest in the game of cricket?
I think the first memory of watching cricket, I mean, until I was certain, I think I was about 6 or 7, cricket was just something that happened around me. I didn't really take much interest in it. But then I just remember watching Murali be no-balled at that 95 Boxing Day test in Australia. And that was and it was sort of a big thing. I think I remember my father watching it. I remember a couple of other people being in the house at the time and how outraged they were at it. And that was the first time that it really sort of hit me that, that something major was happening, that something upsetting was happening, that people were getting riled up over something that was happening thousands of kilometers away in a game, essentially. And I think that's when I first started watching it. And to that day, that's one of the defining moments of my sort of cricket love. I still remember very clearly, the living room and how that started. And then, of course, the 96 World Cup came along. And then it just took not just my love of cricket, but the love of cricket, probably all my friends, everyone in Sri Lanka to a new level. So ever since then, I've been hooked and watching cricket from. It doesn't really matter if Sri Lanka's not playing. Even I just basically hoovered up cricket all through my teens and happily been able to make a job out of it now.
Absolutely incredible. And that 96 World Cup, obviously, is that your favorite World Cup memory for Sri Lanka?
I mean, yeah, it has to be, doesn't it? I mean, there's no other World Cup to quite match it. I was really happy actually. A few years ago, before the 2015 Cricket World Cup, I was able to go and interview a few of the people who were involved in it in the 96 campaign, and not necessarily the leading lights, but some of the supporting players, some the Pramodya Wickramasinghes of the world, those kinds of people, the Ravindra Pushpakumaras, and then able to put together the story of that campaign. And it's staggering what happened there. I mean, Sri Lanka was so unfancied, there's no way that they should have won a World Cup in 96. It's one of the great cricket stories, probably one of the great sporting stories, that a nation that was going through a war, had very little cricketing infrastructure, had lost 2/3 of their games leading up to the World Cup. And suddenly they they start playing this very aggressive brand of cricket, and it all clicks for them, and sort of stars align, and it was a perfect storm in many ways. So that World Cup, I think, having done the story on it as well, just endears me to it even more.
That's so good, because as Indian fans, I think it would qualify as one of our worst memories growing up, because I think I was about 11 when the semi-final happened, where I think I can still remember where I was sitting and when Kalu whipped off the bails, right, when Sachin was out of his ground. Right. And I mean, every time I watch it sometimes when I'm late at night perhaps, I watch it and I hope for a different result. Right, like somehow you hope. Tony Gregg, I think, was on commentary and he said Sachin's in trouble and all of that stuff, and you're just hoping that there's a different result. It's almost like when you watch the Chennai test when Sachin hits the ball up and off Suck Lane and Wasim is under it. You just somehow hope, would history have been different if he dropped that catch, or what if Sachin hadn't taken off for that run? But I mean, incredible result for Sri Lanka. The other game they beat India in actually was the game in Delhi where Sachin had got 130 odd, and the two openers just came out and blew everyone away. We'd never seen hitting like that. It was Jayasuriya and Kalu Wittrana, which I think just changed how cricket was played for the best part of 2 decades, I would say almost. We've kind of now gone back a little bit to the way one-day cricket was played before Sri Lanka changed it all in 96. But incredible achievement, I think, for them. And what was your worst World Cup memory? Do you have any one particular memory that stands out?
Well, I was going to jump in there and say, while you were saying you wish that there was a different result, the 2011 World Cup final was pretty it was pretty traumatic in some ways. because Sri Lanka had played so well leading up to it. And there was also that dropped catch. Gambhir got dropped, I think, with the score on 70 odd. And if that catch had been taken, I think it was Nuwan Kulasekara down at long on or something. If that had been taken, India would have been 3 down for 70, and maybe Dhoni wouldn't have put himself up the order. Maybe things would have been different. So that World Cup memory is a little bit hard to handle. The 2007 World Cup final wasn't so traumatic in the same way, because you were up against this all-time great Australian team, and it always felt like Sri Lanka would have to do, there would have to be something crazy happening for Sri Lanka to win that final. Whereas the 2011 one, it kind of felt like they were going in, maybe not quite on even terms, but almost. There wasn't a clear favorite in that final, and so that one was a little bit rough. The others, 99, I remember watching Sri Lanka crashing out, but again, that was kind of, no one was really excited about that in Sri Lanka, because we'd seen the form of the team going into the tournament, and playing in England, where they hadn't done well at that point in history. Sri Lanka had never really done well in England in one days. So it was less, there was less expectation, whereas I think the amount of expectation there was in that 2011 final. Also remember the 2012 World T20 final, where at home in Kettarama, where Sri Lanka were clearly the best team of the tournament going up to it, and then Marlon Samuels played that incredible innings. He'd also got dropped, and then I remember the walk into Kettarama Stadium. It was just like everyone was already partying, and then a couple of hours after I finished writing my stories and leaving the stadium, just how deathly silent everything in Colombo was, because it had all got geared up for this huge party, and everyone had been let down. So that was one that stays in the memory for negative reasons.
Wow, I'd actually flown down to India from London for the 2011 World Cup final, and I have to say the innings that Jayawardene played, I don't think I've seen anyone play quite like that. It was just silken. I mean, before he even knew what he was doing, he'd got to about 80, and no one actually knew how he'd got there and so quickly. And I think just an incredible batsman. The World T20, of course, Sri Lanka did win the next one, beating India again. So there's a little bit of history there. But let's come to the present now, right, Fidel? The Sri Lankan campaign hasn't quite gone to plan. What do you make of its performance in the 2019 World Cup this time around? Obviously, you've lost some massive names. You've lost Mahela, you've lost Sangakkara, who've retired. Malinga is still playing and still performing. But what do you make of the World Cup so far for Sri Lanka, noting that they've got a mathematical chance of still making the semis?
Yeah, I think in some ways they've already exceeded expectations, because I don't think anyone expected Sri Lanka, even the most hardcore Sri Lankan fan wouldn't have expected Sri Lanka to get into these semi-finals. They just wanted the team to not be wooden spooners, not to be right at the bottom of the table. So in some ways, that England win was the moment where they blew everyone away, and everyone thought, okay, they've got this one great win now, and it was probably the upset of the tournament. At least they've imposed themselves on the World Cup in a way that someone like even South Africa haven't. So that was great, but I think, a lot of the issues leading up to it, they picked a team where there are about, 3 or 4 players who you have no idea why they've been picked. The selection leading up to it, in the 2 or 3 years leading up to it, there was just such a huge roll call of players coming through, from the Sana Jayasuriya selection committee to the Graham LeBroy one, and then the current one. They just kept picking different players almost every series, and you knew that it wasn't in a healthy place. Sri Lanka's cricket wasn't in a healthy place. And so it hasn't really surprised me that they've only won 2 games so far. It's not something that's come out of the blue. I think they've missed a real opportunity to name a really young team and build for the next World Cup for 2023, which is in India. Which if they play their cards right, I think they've got some raw material there in terms of players that can be a force at that World Cup. But everyone wants quick results, and every selection committee that comes in wants to deliver these great wins. rather than planning, 3-4 years down the line. So it would have been great to see players like Kasan Rajitha is now into the squad because Nuwan Pradeep has been ruled out due to chickenpox. But it would have been great to see Rajitha play right through. It would have been great to see likes of Dasun Shanaka there, Niroshan Dikwella there. They played a bunch of older players who are, at the end of their career. And it hasn't worked out. So they've lost out, in two separate ways because they've missed out on this opportunity to blood these younger players and give them World Cup experience.
Yeah, it's been a bit of, as you said, a rotating cast of players. Varun, can you, I don't know, I'm not sure I can, but can you actually name the Sri Lankan 11 at this stage? I think I would struggle to say the top 11 players in Sri Lanka at this point. But at one point I could.
Yeah, DJ, actually, I was going to say the same thing. As embarrassed as I am, I don't think I could do it as well. And I think Fidel has summarized it pretty accurately. I just feel that batting... there's just no batting firepower anymore, even though they've got some names. They've got the Mendes, they've got Pereira, but something just doesn't seem to be clicking.
Yeah, very interesting. So, Fidel, let's talk about the next game, right? For the next big game for India, because we're an Indian cricket podcast. We're playing Sri Lanka next weekend. How do you see that panning out? Because at one point, I think we played each other every few days almost. It felt like that there was an India-Sri Lanka game, and even in the big tournaments, people started tuning out if India played Sri Lanka. But how do you see this particular game going, and who do you see the key performers being from either side?
Well, I mean, I think India clearly have the best bowling attack in the tournament, and Sri Lanka have one of the worst batting lineups, especially that middle order is incredibly fragile and delicate right now. So I kind of fear for what's going to happen, especially if Sri Lanka bat first. What's Jasprit Bumrah and Chahal and Kuldeep going to do to them? Like, I think there is genuine apprehension about what will happen in that game. I think India is just superior to Sri Lanka by such a huge distance that it'll take something absolutely unbelievable for Sri Lanka to win that match, to perform creditably. The other thing is maybe India will have already qualified by then, and maybe they've already secured themselves that number one spot. So maybe they'll take their foot off the pedal a little bit and give Sri Lanka a chance to maybe spring an upset. But if Sri Lanka beat India, that'll be an upset on a phenomenal level, because the gap between the teams is so vast right now. It doesn't necessarily have to be going forward, but right now the space where this team is at, with a lack of sort of penetrative bowlers, and especially that middle order that is horrendously out of form. Angelo Matthews has been he scored an 80 odd against England, but he did it looking very, very scratchy and looking like he didn't he was not timing the ball at all. And then we saw against South Africa how I guess timid that middle order is. Against someone like Dwayne Pretorius, who's not a great bowler, they still weren't able to get him away and get the runs that they needed. So because of that, I think India are runaway favourites, and it's hard to see Sri Lanka getting up and getting over India in that game.
Varun, your thoughts on Sri Lanka versus India next weekend?
I think, I think Fidel has summarized it perfectly. I think India is a much superior team as of now. It may not have been so 10 years ago. But in fact, Fidel, I wanted to ask you one question, because I think the match we're all pretty much aligned is, what's been the state of the infrastructure in Sri Lankan cricket over the last 10 years or so? And I ask that because a lot of people we chat with say that India has invested in things like the IPL and the infrastructure. And today we're at a situation where, you probably got 20 or 30 players who could all be ready for the playing 11. Do you see that kind of infrastructure being invested in Sri Lanka?
No, absolutely not. And I think that's the great failing of Sri Lankan cricket is its domestic system and its failure to come up with something that is even mildly effective. So India is a nation of 1 billion. I was talking to, we don't have to compare with India, because India is so vast and the size and of the nations is so different. But for example, we're talking to some South African correspondents here and talking about comparing our domestic structure with theirs. And they have 6 teams and a pool of tens of millions to pick from. whereas Sri Lanka has, a population of 20 million and there are 23 first-class teams. You can imagine how modest the level of competition will be in that tournament. It's just so, bloated and every batsman. So if you're a batsman in a decent team in the club tournament, even in the one-day tournament, you know that the opposition probably has one good bowler or two good bowlers. You just play those bowlers out, and you can score very freely off the others because the gap in quality between inside that attack is going to be quite big because there's like 250 first-class players or domestic players playing at that level. So I think that's where Sri Lanka have really gone wrong. It sort of loops back into its faulty constitution, and it loops back into eventually, as everything does in Sri Lanka, into national politics. There's just been a stubbornness and I guess it's just self-serving administrators, right? I mean, they don't want to change something that works for them. It doesn't work for the country's cricket, but it works for them personally. So they don't want to change it. And, people have tried. I mean, Mahela's Jayawardene and Kumar Sangakkara, along with Aravinda de Silva, put forward a plan to overhaul the domestic system and cricketing governance in Sri Lanka. It's basically just gathering dust at the sports ministry. So many outspoken critics of the system have, for example, Siddharth Vettimuni was board president for a little while, and he tried to overhaul it. It hasn't worked. It is the biggest frustration in Sri Lankan cricket is how consistently they shoot themselves in the foot with their domestic system. And many players have said, if Sri Lanka wins a match, if they do well, if they win a series, it's in spite of the system, not because of it. It's very hard to go and watch a cricket match in Sri Lanka, a domestic match, and pick out who the best players are, because they could just be players who are taking advantage of very, very poor bowlers or very poor batsmen. And once you get them up to a decent level, they might not be able to be successful. So it's such a broken system that, even from a selection perspective, it's difficult to figure out who your best players are. You could be just good at smashing, finger spinners, of which there are many in Sri Lankan cricket, and you have no real technique against seam bowling, for example, and all those faults get massively found out at the top level, and that's partly what's fed into this turnover in the national team, is that players who come in are obviously not suited to international cricket, and they then get, but in order to find a player that's suited to international cricket, you have to go through like 5 or 6 other players before you find someone and you can point to him and say, this player can handle it here. So it's broken in quite a profound way.
That's incredibly insightful, Fidel. I was going to ask you what the role of ex-cricketers, because you've had so many superstars over the years, what the role of those cricketers in Sri Lanka cricket was, but you already answered that. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? You won that great test match in South Africa, Kushal Perera playing, I think, what was rated the best test innings in history, which, I mean, it was an incredible innings, the 150 odd that he got. And you beat England as well in this World Cup, which, as you said, belied a lot of expectations, and England being the favourites. I mean, who knows what happens next weekend, right? Because India, as you say, may take their foot off the pedal. We're hoping they don't. I think where's the future of Sri Lanka cricket? I mean, because Malinga, I think, is probably done after this, though he says he wants to play the 2023 World Cup. I think he said that in jest. What is the future of Sri Lanka cricket, and who are the players who are going to lead Sri Lanka cricket into the next era of dominance?
Yeah, I mean, it's not. So the thing about this team is that there are quite a few young sparks. So someone like a Kusal Mendis, especially in Test cricket, and I'll talk a lot about Test cricket because it's a format that Sri Lanka are doing the best in. As you mentioned, that crazy win in South Africa, which even I, months later, I'm still trying to make sense of how exactly Sri Lanka managed to get that kind of victory. It wasn't just one test; it was and
it was a Test series. Yes, exactly.
I mean, okay, you win one test on the back of one of the all-time great innings, but then to go to Port Elizabeth in the next test and win that game by 8 wickets, that was in some ways more stunning to me, because something, once in a lifetime thing happened in Durban that allowed them to win that test by 1 wicket. But then going to Port Elizabeth, you're still playing South Africa in South Africa. They absolutely monstered Pakistan a couple of months earlier. And then the way Kusal Mendis and Roushan Fernando batted on that final day, I think they had to get about 140 runs, and Sri Lanka had, or might have been a little bit more than that, 160 runs, and Sri Lanka had 8 wickets left. And these two guys just went out, and they were just like flowing from ball one. Steyn was being hit around the park. Rabada was being hit around. Olivier, who was part of the system back then, was being hit around as well. And they just looked like they were just way better than the opposition. And to see 2 young Sri Lankan batsmen do that in South Africa that was something special. And this is, I mentioned Kusal Mendis because this is probably the 3rd best innings that he's played. And he's 24 now. He played another all-time great innings against Australia, against Stark and Hazelwood and Lyon, in Pallekele in 2016, to basically overturn a big deficit in that test match. And that was like the turning point in the series. Sri Lanka went on to win 3-0. That was like on a pitch that no one else could score more than 55. He made 176, and he did it in like very quick time. It was a very brisk innings. And then, of course, he also batted out an entire day in Wellington just in December alongside Angelo Matthews. So to play 3 innings like that, he's got a very, very high ceiling as a player. He hasn't quite got it right in one-day cricket yet. I think he goes through quite a lot of dips. If I were a Sri Lankan cricket selector, I would probably tell him to take a break from one-day cricket. T20s, he's doing okay. He can stay there and develop the attacking sort of shot making in his game. And in tests, obviously, you need him. But in one-day cricket, where he's not having a lot of success, and probably I would probably leave him out there and allow him to develop the other formats of the game. Apart from him, I already mentioned Roushan Fernando, who could be another good batsman going forward. And then you have some, decent fast bowlers coming through as well. Lahiru Kumara has helped win that South Africa series. Vishwa Fernando is another one. Dushmantha Chamira is another fast bowler. So there are enough players there, I think, for a future team to come together. But it's just Sri Lanka is so good at squandering talent. Like, for example, Angelo Matthews is someone who should be coming into the best years of his batting career, but is barely hanging on right now in the one-day team. He's, he was dropped last year over fitness issues, essentially. And at this World Cup, he's been pretty scratchy. So there's so much talent there. There's so much like raw material there. It's just a failure to polish it up and bring it up to international standard and create those consistent results. There's still, cricket is still by far the number one sport in the country. I mean, lots of people drew comparisons, especially in 2018 when Sri Lanka were going through a really tough time, whether Sri Lanka would be the next West Indies. And, we've of course since seen West Indies resurgence, but at the time it felt like West Indies had been on sort of like an inexorable decline. And lots of people thought that maybe Sri Lanka is going the same way, but it won't, because there's so much passion for for cricket in Sri Lanka, despite the failures of the national team. You still go out. I'll walk out of my apartment and there's cricket going on all over the place, and there's no other sport that has even a chance of catching it. So I think in some ways it's bright, but you always have to put this big proviso on it, because if administrators continue to do the things that they're doing, if the domestic system continues to depreciate, like to degrade, essentially, I mean, the great players will say that the domestic system was much better 15 years ago when they were just coming through. If that continues to happen, then you never know. All that talent could be squandered, and Sri Lanka, might end up being a much worse team. And this year we've had a few surprising results, but they were surprises for a reason, because Sri Lanka had been playing poorly in the lead up to that. They're not in any way a consistent team right now.
Yeah, let's hope the future for Sri Lanka cricket is bright. And I think we said this when we spoke to someone from the West Indies the other day, as well as Pakistan, that world cricket needs strong teams like the West Indies as well as Sri Lanka, for them to be strong, and world cricket then becomes stronger. Fidel, you've also been doing some other stuff apart from cricket. So do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about the book that you've just written?
So I the reason why I wrote this book, this is a travel book on Sri Lanka. Essentially, I lived in New Zealand for quite a long time. And when I was a kid, there was a war going on in Sri Lanka, and there were all these places in the country that I couldn't visit because they were either out of bounds, they were essentially a war zone, or there were so many curfews and checkpoints on the roads that you could never travel there. And then when I came back to live in Sri Lanka as an adult, it was already sort of like a booming tourist destination for foreigners. So I thought, why is it that everyone else is having fun in the country that I wanted to travel in 20 years ago or 15 years ago? And so it was just me going around Sri Lanka for 8 weeks, from place to place, kind of rediscovering the country for myself, and also finding out how it's, what things were changed by the war, what things haven't changed, how is it transitioning into peacetime, how is this tourism boom impacting it, and also looking at the history of each place and finding out how it resonates with what's going on there at present. There's a lot of jokes and a lot of me making fun of travelers or the place or myself often. So it's a travelogue and quite a personal story as well. Something completely different from cricket. In fact, cricket people who read it asked me, why is there no cricket in this book? But it was a chance to write about something else and write about a country that I obviously love and live in. So I hope that if people do get it, that they enjoy it. But I'm really excited that it's just been released in the last couple of weeks. So it's quite fun to watch other people read something and enjoy something that I'd been working on for a couple of years.
And Fidel is a terrible salesman. He's a very good writer, but he hasn't told you the name of the book, so I'll do the honors. It's called Upon a Sleepless Isle, Travels in Sri Lanka by Bus, Cycle and Trishaw.
Yeah, hopefully my publishers aren't listening to this. That was a terrible picture.
No, but we'll put a link to the book in the show notes as well. So if anyone wants to read about traveling in Sri Lanka, which I will certainly love to do, they can go and find the book there. Fidel, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. You are one of my favorite cricket writers. I think you rank probably second after Jared Kimber, so don't be upset by that. Thank you so much.
Right, I'll take second.
Yeah, second to Jared's decent. But yeah, I've really enjoyed speaking to you. Varun as well, I'm sure, echoes the sentiment. We love Sri Lanka and we hope the team grows from strength to strength. Although not in the next World Cup match because India is going to play them. But thank you so much for joining us on the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast, and we'd love to have you back when India is playing Sri Lanka again. Thank you so much again.
Filter coffee is a fascinating beverage. You need to pick the right beans, blend them in the right proportion, roast them to perfection, and slow brew at the right temperature to get the perfect cup. Which is exactly like great conversations as well. You need to track down the most interesting minds, get them into their zone, and settle down for an unhurried, unscripted chat. And coffee for me is always, always, always best enjoyed with friends. I'm Karthik Nagarajan, and do share my table as I meet some of the most interesting people I know and sit them down for a strong cup of coffee and an even stronger conversation. Join me every Wednesday for a freshly brewed episode. This is not frappe. This is the Filter Coffee Podcast.
Sachin Tendulkar, Virat Kohli, Don Bradman, and now Cyrus Brocha. Okay, probably not in the right company. I mean, Don Bradman is Australian. But it's called Cyrus Says, a wonderful show about everything. Find the show on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts.